Okay, so elucidating, that's a nice big word, overdues. Right. Now, I think with the pressure on budgets that we're seeing, particularly in school libraries in the UK at the moment, chasing your overdue library material is just really, it's vital, and to do it on a regular basis. So we're going to use overdues to do this. So you can add as many overdue notices as you need to suit your particular library situation. And you can see I've got quite a few set up here. You can send one notice to borrowers with all their overdues on it, or you can create a series of notices that, let's say, up the ante according to how overdue items are. Let's say from a few days overdue to a final notice to parents or school departments for staff to recover items, or the cost of the items. Now you can send overdues on paper or via email. Now, email notices can be sent out automatically via the housekeeping overnight. They can be sent out to individuals or class teachers for a class group. You can restrict who the notice is going to be for, or what resources are going to be recalled on those notices. And you can also send out reminders before items become overdue. So there's quite a lot that you can do with it. So it's not just overdues. So I've got a number of overdues that I've set up here. I'm going to come back to exactly what these are a little bit later. But I'm going to create a new overdue, or the first part of it. So the main parameters that control how you set up an overdue. So I'm just going to expand my screen out and go to new here. So when I name a notice, you can see that I've given it numbers here in front of it. So this is a way of making sure that the notices are in the right order on the screen, because it will be arranged alphabetically, but numbers come first, so I put numbers there to start off with, and then I can give it a description there. So I just quickly give it a name and add that. So with determining the first part here, it asks us due dates. So how overdue an item is going to be, or due between dates, which is fairly new. So with the days overdue from and to, so the two fields there, where we're looking to put in how old an item or how long an item's been overdue for. So the actual dates that are reported on here are determined by a parameter 3404. So with the days overdue, are you going to include closed days or not? So if you're going to include closed days, this will be calendar days overdue. But if you say no to this parameter, we're talking about open or working days. So one of the questions that comes up with this quite a bit is that what dates am I actually looking at for overdues? It can be a bit deceptive because it may not necessarily be calendar days, it could be working days. So the period is a lot longer. At days overdue from and to, if you have, let's say, progressive overdues, let's say 1 to 7 days overdue, and then 8 to 14 days and 15 to 21 days, you're able to put that information in here. Or it could be a longer period of time. So if I put in an extreme example here, I'm going to pick up everything that's overdue within my system. Hopefully we won't get back to 10,000 days. Our due between dates. Now, as I said, this is a fairly new option. Now, this allows you to define very specifically when the items are due back. So this allows you to be specific for items like textbooks, for instance. Coming up to this time of year, in the UK particularly, you've got textbooks that are going to be due back. So you can put in a specific date there. It may also be that we only want to really recall items up to well, back to a particular date. So we don't want to go way back into the history of our overdues. We're going to say, right, cut-off day items that were due back a year ago. I'm not going to send out overdues for anything earlier than that. So this does allow you to be very specific, whereas days overdue, you may not really know what this is going to actually, what dates this is going to go over, particularly because of that parameter that I mentioned. So is it working days? Is it calendar days? This is much more specific. And the other thing that I didn't mention before is that the days here can be in the negative. So if you're wanting to produce overdues for or a list of items that are actually on loan to a class or to borrowers, you're able to put in a negative here. So items that are due back 100 days in the future, you can put that into your days overdue. And you could probably put that into the due between dates as well. This is allowing you to be much more specific. Now, delivery information. So how we're going to send these out. So I said they can be print or email overdues. So with the print or email, this is exclusively print or exclusively email. Now with email, you've got to have an email address in the borrower record for this to work. Print or email, if you've got an email address in the borrower record, then the notice will be sent out via email. If you don't have an email address in the borrower record, it'll be sent out via print, or it'll be produced in a print format or a printable format there. Now the email address that it goes to, you've got two email addresses here. So one, the primary email address might be the student's, the alternate email address might be the actual parent's email address. So you can choose which email address you're going to send that to. And then the sender's email address, this is taken up from your management parameters in the first instance, but you can replace it with a more appropriate email address if you need to here. And then email subject, again, for email notices, you can put in the subject line specifically there. So the next part that we come to is regular and repeat. Now, regular works in different ways according to the delivery method. So with saying yes to regular, if it's for email notices, now exclusively email notices I will add here, this can be controlled via the housekeeping. So the housekeeping sends them out overnight. But with print or email notices, you have an option in the right-hand function menu to send out regular notices. Now, irregular means that you have complete control over when these notices go out. You're going to be running the notices yourself. So if you want very specific control, use no for regular. But if you want to have them sent out automatically, the email notices specifically, say yes. And you do need to make sure that the corresponding option in the housekeeping is set to run your overdues. So I will show you that at the end of the presentation. Now repeat, one notice only or multiple notices. Now I think this depends on the overdue range that you set up at the top here. Now with, let's say, this long-term overdue, I would be saying that I want multiple notices to be sent out. So while an item is overdue within the period that we set here, I want a notice to be produced. So if I run this every week and I want everything that's overdue to be on that notice, then we say multiple notices. Now, one notice only, I tend to use this for the email notices and ones where we have a first, second, and a final notice, or how many you set up. So 1 to 7 days overdue, 8 to 14 days overdue, etc. If you are sending notices via email and you've got it set to multiple notices, then it means that they will get an email every day with their overdues. So every single day an email notice will be produced. And this might get a little bit irritating for some people, so it might negate the effectiveness of the overdues via email if they just get one every day. They'll just probably ignore it. So with the shorter periods, with the progressive notices, I tend to say one notice only. But it really is related to how wide a range the days overdue are. So you may need to play about with this, experiment with it to get what works best for you. Now, with all the parameters that I'm talking about here, there is no absolute right way to do this. It's what suits your library. Now, then we have report name and format and email form. So this is the basic notice format that we're going to be using when we're producing our notices there. So the report names. We have group overdues, so that's for classes, and we also have individual overdues, print notices to be sent out to the individual borrowers. So one message that I've seen or question that I've seen already is, how can I produce a list of overdues for a class teacher? Well, it would be the group overdue notice that you would use. Probably the first one here or the fourth one here, a long format on one page for each class. The concise and the shorter formats, they are a shorter format. It excludes certain information that comes down a little bit further. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples later, but this is what you would be using to send out a notice to a class teacher. So the individual notices, this is what is going to be going out to an individual borrower. The ones that tend to be used the most are these ones here. By roll class, 1, 2, or 3 borrowers per page without the cost or with the cost. So these are paper savers, essentially. So you can cut the pages up and you can distribute those or have them distributed to individual borrowers within the school. You could also use these for the staff borrowers. I know roll classes aren't specifically relevant to them, but it just saves paper, as opposed to the ones where you have just one borrower per page. So one borrower per page. There are also notices with the address in them. So if you are going to be sending out notices to home, to the parents. You've got those with addresses, and you've also got ones that are set up for DL window envelopes. So this is a sort of a standard window envelope that you've got. And I will mention also alternate mail title. That's a field in the borrower record. So if you have the parent's name in the alternate mail title, then it will be addressed to them when you use that notice there. And for mailing, it's addressed to the actual borrower themselves there, and it will have their class details. So again, with the group overdue notices, with the roll class notices here, it will show the borrower's name, their roll class, and their year. The roll class will be at the top of the group overdue notices. And finally, there is a list here. So if you just want a list, maybe for your own purposes to check the overdues, you've got just a plain list, and you've got a list with a barcode, with an actual barcode on it. So I'm just going to choose one of those report formats to put in, and you can export that via PDF or Word. Word has its advantages over PDF because you can edit it once it's been exported. So the email forms. Now you do have group notices and individual notices here. So if you're going to send out group notices to a teacher via email, it's not their borrower email that we're looking at, or their email address. What we're looking at is in circulation in roll classes. Now, I'll just stay there. I won't be able to go into that while I'm in the notice here, but you go into roll class, you edit the roll class, and you can put the teacher's email address into that roll class. So instead of giving them paper, you can send them an email. And that's really an advantage if most of your correspondence within the school to teachers, to staff, is done via email. If they do actually take notice of their emails, that would be the way to go with that. Now, with the other individual forms that we've got here, we've got it set out as first notice, second notice, and final notice there. So they're all individual notices. You can use whichever one you want to. They have the cost in them, and they can also have an overdue link. So this is like bypassing logging into the OPAC search, and where we can go into My Portal and see our current loans or our overdue loans. If you want your users to be able to renew loans, the overdue link notices via email is the way to go for that. They don't have to actually physically log in. This sort of bypasses that. Okay, so I'm just going to choose one of those options there. Now, both of these formats, they have default text in them. So saying, please return your overdue books as soon as possible, something like that. Now, that can be replaced by report header, report message, and report footer. So you're able to personalize the notices for your specific needs here. Now, this has been populated for me automatically because there are management parameters where you can put in a default header, message, and footer text. So the header is going to be right at the top of the notice. So this could be library overdues, for instance. So I can replace that there. And then the message, so this would be something like, again, as I said before, would you please ask your students, or would you please return or renew your overdues as soon as possible? So you put in your own message. And then the footer, I always put in something like this because if you don't put something in here, it will use what's in your management parameters for your library details. So it'll say something like library manager, email address, fax numbers and that type of thing. So I think it's a good idea to put in a footer. So this could be extra piece of text and a signature block. So that's going to replace the text that is in these notices by default. And the last part of this page here, it says include page header and footer. So the page header, a lot of the time, is the library name from your registration in system, and a footer usually is saying that it's been printed by a particular person on a particular day. That's what the footer is talking about here. So it's on the actual, when you do a Word document, you may have a header and a footer. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, I did skip a couple of options here that I've added into my notice that you may not actually see in your notices because I've added it via page edit. It's admin charge per item and replacement per item, or charge replacement per item. So an admin charge can be levied for each item that's overdue when you generate a notice. So it actually generates a charge. So that goes into, when you look at circulation desk, go into identifying a borrower and look at charges, it can generate a charge for each item. And then we have charge replacement per item. Now what this uses, if you choose to tick this, is that it looks at the price that's in the copy record of an item. And again, it will create a charge that goes against the borrower based on that price. There is no specific notice that applies to this when we look at name and format or form here. So you would need to put into, let's say, the report message that this is going to happen if you use these two fields there. And I said before, you may not see these when you're adding a notice or editing it, because I've added this via page edit in system. Okay, so I am going to save what I've done here. And then I'm just going to browse to go back to my list. And you can see that it's gone down to the bottom here. And because of the order with the numbers, it's gone right down to the bottom there. Okay, so I have on the screen here my different notices. Now, if you have notices that you're going to run on a regular basis, they'll be indicated here as such. And if you want to run regular notices from this screen here, you go to overdues and run regular notices. So what that is going to do is it's going to give you links to download both of or all the notices that you have set as regular. If a regular notice is an email notice and it's set up in the housekeeping to run, then that will happen overnight. Okay, so I've got my different overdues showing here. Now again, I've made some changes in page edit to show a little bit more detail Now, one of the things I want to mention here, days due back from and days due back to. Now, I mentioned the parameter 3404 about including close days in this calculation. So when we see this number of days, you look at the date range here. If you're saying that it includes closed days, then we are talking about calendar days here. If you're not including the closed days, then the date range that you're talking about here is not calendar days, it's going to be open days. So don't be deceived by that. It's very easy to get a little bit confused about what's going on here. It does depend on that parameter. Now, I've come back to this screen. I'm going to go back into my record here, because what I've done initially is I've included everything that's overdue within this time period. Now, usually we are going to want to restrict this further. So who's going to get the notice? Like, we only want student notices or staff notices, or we want to restrict as to what we're going to be actually recalling on an overdue. So for borrower selection, we have this option here. So if I want to make it that this is for students only, I can edit borrower selection. So the usual thing that I use here is the borrower type, but you could also use the loan category. So if I've got junior student or senior student, I may have different overdues for these types of students, so I choose that. But the easiest way to exclude staff from a notice is to choose borrower type, and then I can save that. It'll indicate with a tick that you've got a setting here. Now, this is not set in stone. You can always go back in and change it. So if we edit, I delete this first and then I make another selection and then save it. So you can change this as you need to here. Now, resource selection, I mentioned textbooks before. So if I've got a textbook overdue notice, I would edit the resource selection and I may use the collection, or I may use probably the loan category. So I've got a textbook loan category there, so I can restrict on that and then save it. And then I've got 11 textbooks for the students here. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention with this is that before you run a notice, you can view generally who would be on this notice. So if I view this, here are the borrowers and the items that would be on this notice. I can go back to list and then it will mark the record that I was looking at. So if I want to examine this in detail again, I can go back into it. Now, if you have set this not to repeat, what you will see in run and what you will see in view is taking into account the days overdue or the dates that you've set and the borrower and resource selection, but it's not actually taking into account whether you've already produced a notice for the borrowers listed here, and we don't want them to get the same notice again within this period. So if I have already run a notice for the people that are listed here, if I go to run that, it won't produce another notice for them. But it's not excluding that from this number. So again, just be aware of that. It can trick you up. So I'm just going to browse that again. So I'm talking about items that I have set that I don't want to repeat. So I was mentioning things like email notices. I may only want one notice within the period that I've set here. So if this item has already gone out once, if I go to run it, or it's run automatically, now that overdue has gone out via email. If I run a print notice, if it's already been run before, and if everyone's been run before, you may not get a link like this, but when I run a notice, I've got a link to download it. So that's downloading that overdue, and it's a group concise overdue, this one. So it's for the class. It's listing the borrowers within that class. They're on separate pages. And this notice particularly is quite interesting for Alice users. One of the things that Alice used to do with its overdues, it would have a number on the end of it to say how many overdues someone has received. This is the only notice that has something similar. With Oliver, the number of notices is usually related to the date range that you're producing the notice for. So if I just close that up, I'm just going to go back to the notice here. So where I have a heading like first overdue notice, second overdue notice, final overdue notice, it's related to the time that it's overdue for, not how many notices I've actually produced here. The other thing you will see here, that this has been run. It tells you down the bottom here, notices that have been run today. So if you have them running via housekeeping, when you log in first thing in the morning, you might see that they've already run today. Now the other notices that I have here, so apart from these three, upping the ante according to how overdue they are, with the final notice going to the parents, and that they're all print notices, these. I have a roll class notice for all loans here, and what I've done here is I have used the days, the due between dates. So I've gone back way into the past. It's allowed me to be quite specific in what I'm going to be producing a notice for. I'll just cancel out of that, go back to my list here. The pre-overdue notices. So you can see that it's going up to the 31st of May, 14 days into the future. So this time of year, when you're trying to get books back from students who are about to leave, this is the way that you could do it. You can put in, let's say, negative numbers, both in days overdue from and to. But again, you may want to go back into the past quite a bit. Okay, so if I browse again, textbook replacement that I have here. This one, I've actually set an admin charge per item and to charge the replacement for that item. So it's going to take that from the price in the copy record, and then I've got specific text that I've added to this where I've explained what's going on with this, the charge that's going to be made, and what an impact having these items overdue. It's a great expense to the school. Okay, so just to finish up, just some of the notices that are produced. So this is the individual notice by role class. So, whoops, I just bring that down. Right, so this is a role class notice. I do only have one borrower, sorry, this is an individual overdue. So we've got our borrower here, name, class, the header, so our header that we've added ourselves, the message that we've added ourselves, the items listed, and then your signature block, your footer. 3 notices per page. You've got a cut line here, so you can use a guillotine to cut those off with. Final notice. So this is this one here. So number 3 there. Now I've used either email. I'll just try and make this a bit larger so you can see it. So I've used email to send that out with. So it does have the name and address of the borrower and then the text that I put in. So header, message, footer there with the items shown. And with this one, I've also got a link to the items overdue within the OPAC search area. Now, this footer here, that's coming from the from your parameters area. This is my print notice, and this is using the DL envelope, so you can see the way that that is justified in. So we've indented that, and it's to fit these DL envelope, window envelopes. So that's a standard envelope. So it's 3 folds there. So alternate mail title, that would be the parent's name with the address details, and then your header, your message, and your footer there. So I've done the group overdue concise. We've seen that before. And then pre-overdue notice that I've set. So number 7 here. So the result that I get here is that it is looking at something that is not due back yet. So this is due back on the 22nd of May. So I've used one of my email formats. So any of the overdue, the first, second, final notice, it doesn't really matter if you put your own text in there. And then I have the textbook one, so individual overdue notice with address. So it's slightly different. Yes, now the borrower here doesn't actually have an address, so that's why we're not seeing anything there at the moment. But here's my text there. So header, message, footer. There's the item there. But with Hannah, what's happened is that in the record, in her borrower record, if we were going to go to circulation desk and bring up her details. Getting a bit ahead of myself here. I'll just do that. Go into charges. I ran this yesterday. There's the replacement charge and the administration charge there. So that was generated by the overdue notice. So that's something a bit extra that you've got if necessary with that. So I'd better finish up fairly quickly. So just a couple of last things to finish up with. Housekeeping details. 2 housekeeping options that you've got here. Overdue days update, that runs to update the overdue information. This runs the notices that you've set to run as regular for emails. And with the parameters, these 3400 to 402, there's the message defaults, and then 3404 include close days, yes or no. So if you do need to check what you've got setting there, if you're not quite sure why the dates you are getting here don't quite match what you're expecting, it could be that parameter that is doing that. Okay, so I think I will stop at that point. So I hope I've been able to clear up some of your queries, but if not, I shall have a look and see what you've been coming up with while I've been presenting that, and I will try and answer that before the end of the session.